In these days leading up to the winter solstice, the daylight diminishes and the darkness dominates. Sadly, this entire year seems like it has been a long day's journey into night, as the playwright Eugene O'Neill puts it. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, the darkness seems to just keep growing. 2020 will go down in history as a year not just of death and disease, but also of economic crisis, natural disaster, global distress, societal division, political power plays, vitriol, and violence. It's a catastrophe. Our world will never be the same. And so we cry out for deliverance. About 2,000 years ago, a young man named Yeshua from the village of Nazareth in northern Israel stood up in front of his local synagogue one Sabbath and read these words from the prophet Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Here at the end of 2020, we're all hoping 2021 will be a better year, a year of the Lord's favor. And the prophet Isaiah describes for us what that looks like. It's a time of good news for the poor and liberation for the oppressed. It's a time of comfort for those who mourn and the restoration of wholeness for the broken. It's a time when those who despair will be fragrant with the oil of gladness, when they will wear a crown of beauty and a garment of praise. That is our hope. That has always been humanity's hope. But Jesus showed how this vision comes about in a rather surprising way. Even as he read those words, he told those listening that Isaiah's prophecy was fulfilled in him. And the story goes on to tell us that they wanted to kill him for claiming this. In other words, Jesus saw the devastation of the devastated, and he was willing to be devastated himself for their sake. The paradox is, Jesus overcame the catastrophe the world had become by another kind of catastrophe. And the world would never be the same. The word catastrophe literally means an overturning. In writing about catastrophes, renowned author J.R.R. Tolkien noted that in great literature, there are at least two kinds of catastrophe. And he coined two words to describe this. The first is discatastrophe, and the second is eucatastrophe. While the former represents a sudden, harmful form of destruction, the latter conveys the idea of a good disaster. Now, this is what the first followers of Jesus never expected. When Peter called Jesus the Christ, he never expected Jesus to affirm Peter's confession and predict his own crucifixion in the same breath. The Christ was to be the special anointed one. He was the ruler Isaiah predicted, who would come to usher in an era of peace and prosperity, health and wholeness, joy and gladness. But the way Jesus fulfilled this prophecy came as a shock to everyone. He reordered society by decentering those in power and gathering close to himself the castaways and sinners, those on the margins, the ones who were considered cursed and unimportant. Such love cost him his very life. For those who were devastated, he himself was willing to be devastated. His life was one spectacular, sudden, and surprising catastrophe amid the discatastrophe of history. It turned out to be a good disaster, as his followers saw firsthand that out of that temporal kind of death springs the eternal kind of life. Does the world feel like it is caving in around you? Like it has all come crashing down? A Christian is one who dares to believe that such destruction does not have the last word. In fact, a Christian is one who has the audacity to claim that out of this catastrophe, a wonderfully wild new mess can take shape, stunning in its beauty. And even more, God does this work through Christ in us and through us. C.S. Lewis describes it this way. He says, "Now the whole offer which Christianity makes is this, that we can, if we let God have his way, come to share in the life of Christ. He came to this world and became a man in order to spread to other men the kind of life he has, by what I call a good infection. Every Christian is to become a little Christ. The whole purpose of becoming a Christian is simply nothing else. A Christian is one who has been infected by Jesus. And we can't help but spread the infection. The mystery is when we let the infection of Jesus get inside us, he ruins us for good. This is not a time for hobby Christianity. Are we willing to let Jesus do his uncomfortable work in us, to heal us by letting him reorder our inner world? Are we willing to let Jesus reorder how we think of what it means to be the church? There is no real redemption without such deep-seated reordering. The difficulty of it is that such a reordering often feels ruinous to us, like crucifixion. Oscar Romero puts it this way: no one can celebrate a genuine Christmas without being truly poor. The self-sufficient, the proud, those who, because they have everything, have no need even of God, for them, there will be no Christmas. Only the poor, the hungry, those who need someone to come on their behalf will have that someone. That someone is God, Emmanuel, God with us. Without poverty of spirit, there can be no abundance of God. With Jesus, there is no such thing as salvation by self-justification. By his grace, our defenses come crashing down. By his love, we no longer need to pretend we have it all together. By his power, we come to grips with our own weakness. This is how the little Christ dies with Christ. This is the good disaster that makes all things new. And when we allow him to ruin us like this, it ruins our world in a good way. No longer are we satisfied to live in our little segregated social sectors of well-ordered comfort. By love, he calls us out of our self-assured complacency to collide with those who are different, with those who make us uncomfortable. The Christian knows firsthand that when the church has a love collision with the world, a new, wildly beautiful reality is created. Hope suddenly erupts in our hearts. As theologian Leslie Newbigin says, the church's mission began as the radioactive fallout from an explosion of joy. And so we are willing to sacrifice even the comfort of how we like to experience church for the sake of love. Our very social order is disrupted by the Jesus kaboom that changed everything and is still changing everything today. This is what no one would have predicted when Jesus read Isaiah's prophecy that day so long ago. When Isaiah prophesied that the redeemed will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated, no one could have seen that Jesus, the Anointed One, would bring all this about through the messes he made. In the midst of such immense destruction, may we not be given over to despair, but hope that through his good catastrophe, he is able to make all things new in us and through us, his little Christs in the making.